She was sent to observe. No weapon, no orders, just a clipboard and a seat on the ridge. But when the comms died and even the SEALs started lowering their rifles in surrender, she did something no one expected. She stepped alone into the kill zone that had swallowed whole squads and made every bullet count. The desert wind at FOB Reaper carried the smell of diesel fuel and resignation in equal measure. The base squatted against the Iraqi landscape like something that had given up, trying to look permanent. All prefab walls and razor wire that had been patched too many times to inspire confidence. The mountains beyond the perimeter rose like broken teeth against a sky that never seemed to change color. Major Elena Torres stepped down from the transport helicopter's ramp with careful precision that spoke of old injuries still remembered by muscle and bone. Mid-40s, unremarkable in the way career military learned to be. Regulation brown hair, pulled back tight, standard-issue uniform that had been pressed but not pampered, and boots that showed were in all the right places. She carried a single duffel bag and a clipboard that looked like it had survived more deployments than most personnel. Chief Ryan Cross waited by the fuel depot, arms crossed, chewing what was left of his morning coffee. At 35, he moved with controlled aggression of someone who'd earned his rank by making hard decisions in places where hesitation got people killed. His tactical vest hung loose over a sweat-stained t-shirt, and his weapon sat at low ready. Not because he expected trouble, but because expecting trouble had kept him alive through 5 deployments. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because what happened next would prove that the most dangerous people are usually the ones you'd never suspect. He watched Torres walk across the landing zone with growing irritation. She didn't look like much, didn't move like an operator, didn't carry herself like someone who belonged on a forward operating base where the enemy had been taking shots at the wire every night for 4 weeks. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered to his 2IC, Petty Officer First Class Martinez, who was standing beside him. "They want us to babysit a logistics rep." Martinez spat into the dust and shook his head. "Brass says she's here to observe and assess. Want to see how we operate in the pit." The pit. Even saying the name made both men unconsciously glance toward the western ridge where the land dropped away into a natural bowl of stone and shadow that had been eating American lives for 8 months. 4 SEAL squads had gone in. Parts of 3 had come back out. The rest were still down there, marked by GPS coordinates that nobody talked about during evening chow. Torres approached them with measured pace of someone who wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere, but knew exactly where she was going. "Chief Cross." Her voice was steady, unremarkable. The kind of tone you heard in briefing rooms where people discuss death like a budget item. "That's right. You're the observer. I'm here to assess operational efficiency in hostile terrain." She glanced toward the western ridge without being obvious about it. "I understand you've had some challenges with the designated AO." Martinez snorted. "Challenges? That's one word for it." Cross shot him a look, then turned back to Torres. "Ma'am, with respect, the pit isn't the kind of place where observers typically survive long enough to file reports." Something flickered across her expression. Not offense, not fear, just patient recognition, like someone hearing a song they'd learned years ago in a different key. "Then it should be an interesting assessment." Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the morning briefing had the subdued atmosphere of a funeral that hadn't quite started yet. Maps covered every available wall surface, marked with red X's that told a story nobody wanted to read twice. Cross stood at the front of the room, pointing to satellite imagery of the pit projected on a screen. Grid reference 23 Delta. Natural depression approximately 900 meters across, steep approaches on all sides. No confirmed structures, no visible defensive positions, no obvious high-value targets. He paused, his jaw working around words he didn't want to say. 4 teams have gone in over the last 8 months. Alpha Squad lost 5 men and extracted under fire. Charlie went in with 10, came out with 4. All wounded, 3 critical. Delta Squad, he didn't finish. Everyone knew what had happened to Delta Squad. Torres sat in the back corner, clipboard balanced on her knees, taking notes in handwriting that was precise to the point of being mechanical. She hadn't asked a single question during the 45-minute brief, hadn't requested clarification on tactical details, hadn't even shifted in her chair. But Cross noticed the way she watched the screen, the way her eyes tracked contour lines and elevation markers like she was reading a story written in topographical ink. When he'd mentioned previous casualty rates, Her pen had paused for just a moment, not with surprise, but with recognition that came from seeing familiar patterns. The enemy's using the terrain against us, Cross continued. Natural funnel points, overlapping fields of fire, concealed positions that give them advanced warning of any approach. It's textbook defensive positioning, except we can't identify where they're positioned. Torres rode in the passenger seat of the Humvee, her rucksack at her feet, attention focused on the horizon. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the base, but Cross noticed the way she tracked movement. A bird taking flight, dust kicked up by wind, shadows that shifted as the sun climbed higher. When they reached the overlook ridge, Cross called a halt. The vehicles formed a defensive perimeter while the team dismounted and began final preparations. Below them, the pit opened like a wound in the earth, a natural amphitheater of stones and shadow that looked peaceful from a distance, but had killed more Americans than the rest of the province combined. "Observer stays here," Cross said, not quite making an order. "We'll maintain radio contact and report status every 12 minutes. Torres nodded and moved to a position behind an outcropping of rock that provided cover and clear view of the valley below. She pulled small binoculars from her rucksack and began scanning the terrain with systematic attention. "Let's go bring our boys home," Cross said and started walking down the slope. The pit swallowed them like they'd never existed. 12 minutes into the patrol, the first radio check came through clear. Bravo 1 to Overwatch. Status report. Entering target area. No contact. Proceeding to first checkpoint. Torres acknowledged from her position. Overwatch copies. Maintain comm schedule. 24 minutes in, the second check was slightly distorted but still intelligible. Bravo 1 to Overwatch. Checkpoint 1 secured. No visible threats. Proceeding to grid 23 Delta 2. 36 minutes in, the radio crackled with static and Cross's voice came through broken and unclear. Bravo to Over. Some things can't identify, then nothing. Torres tried raising them on 3 different frequencies. She switched to backup channel, then emergency frequency. Nothing but soft hiss of empty air and distant sound of wind moving through rocks below. She lowered the radio and picked up her binoculars. Torres climbed it like she'd been there before. She moved with fluid economy of someone who understood that every step mattered, every breath counted, every moment of visibility could be her last. She used shadows for concealment, natural depressions for cover, and the terrain's own geometry to mask her approach. She was hunting, not randomly, not desperately, but with focused intention that came from understanding exactly what she was looking for and where to find it. The first position was a shallow depression behind a cluster of boulders that provided perfect overwatch of the valley floor. She approached from above, moving slowly across loose stone that could betray her presence with a single misplaced step. When she reached the lip of the depression, she could see him, a single fighter in desert camouflage, prone behind a sniper rifle, completely focused on the Americans trapped below. Torres took the shot from 18 meters. Suppressed, center mass. The man slumped forward without a sound. She was already moving before his body finished falling. The second position was more challenging, a natural cave in the rock face that would have been invisible from the valley floor. She approached from the side, using a narrow ledge that required her to press her back against stone and inch forward one step at a time. When she reached the cave mouth, she could hear voices inside. 2 men speaking in low tones, discussing the trapped Americans like pieces on a chessboard. She pulled a fragmentation grenade from her harness, cooked it for 4 seconds, and rolled it into the cave before dropping flat against the ledge. The explosion echoed off the valley walls like thunder. When the dust settled, the cave was silent. Martinez moved to better position behind a boulder and tried to raise the ridge. Overwatch, this is Bravo 1. What's your status? The radio crackled once, then cleared. Torres's voice came through steady and calm, like she was reporting weather conditions. Bravo 1, continue mission. Opposition is being neutralized. Who's neutralizing it? Martinez demanded. There was a pause, then I am. Cross felt something cold settle in his stomach as he processed the implications. The quiet logistics officer who was supposed to observe from a safe distance was currently fighting her way through enemy positions that had stymied 4 previous SEAL squads. Ma'am, what are your qualifications for? His question was cut off by the sound of another explosion from the western ridge, followed by a long burst of automatic rifle fire. When the echoes died away, the pit was quieter than it had been in 8 months. Qualification sufficient. Torres's voice came back over the radio. Bravo 1, you're clear to advance. Grid 23 Delta 3 is secure. That was the grid reference where 2 missing SEALs were supposed to be located. Cross felt his heart rate spike as he realized what she was telling him. They found Wilson and Hayes 25 minutes later, alive but barely conscious, hidden in a shallow cave with wounds that would have killed them in another few hours. They'd been taken prisoner 5 days earlier, held as bait to draw in rescue operations that could be trapped and destroyed. The medevac helicopter that extracted Wilson and Hayes also picked up Bravo Squad and their mysterious support element. By the time it lifted off from the valley floor, the pit looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Empty, peaceful, showing no signs of the violence that had erupted across its ridges. But something fundamental had changed. The natural trap that had killed 4 squads and held a 5th in place for over an hour had been broken by a single person who'd refused to accept that some fights couldn't be won. Torres sat in the back of the helicopter, a field dressing around her left shoulder and blood on her uniform that belonged to her and several other people. She'd said exactly 3 words since the extraction: mission complete. Status green. Cross sat across from her, trying to reconcile the woman who'd taken notes during morning briefing with the one who'd just cleared a heavily defended position by herself. Ma'am, I need to ask, what's your actual background? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and decided not to explain any of it. Classified. Above my clearance level. Above your need to know. Martinez leaned forward. But you're not really logistics, are you? Torres was quiet for a long moment, watching the Iraqi landscape scroll past through the helicopter's window. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decisions made in places that didn't appear on maps. I was logistics for operations that don't officially exist. That was all the explanation she gave, all the explanation she needed to give. Because the kind of logistics support that could clear a valley full of enemy fighters wasn't the kind that moved supplies or filed reports. It was the kind that removed obstacles to mission success through the application of precise, overwhelming violence. The after-action report was classified at a level that required 3 different signatures just to read the summary. It was filed under a project number that didn't correspond to any official operation and attributed to a unit that didn't appear in any organizational chart. Major Elena Torres disappeared from FOB Reaper that same night. Her quarters were cleared, her paperwork filed, and her travel orders processed without anyone seeing her leave. By morning, it was as if she'd never been there at all. But in the Tactical Operations Center, someone had pinned a small patch to the bulletin board next to the mission photos from the pit. It was black fabric with simple gray stitching, a jagged valley outline with a single name embroidered below it. Torres confirmed. No rank, no unit designation, no explanation. Just recognition of something that officially never happened by people who understood that some victories were too important to celebrate publicly. And in the pit itself, the wind blew through empty positions that had been abandoned by an enemy that decided some ground wasn't worth holding anymore. Because sometimes when you think you've trapped someone, you discover that you've actually trapped yourself. And sometimes the person you thought was just an observer turns out to be exactly what you needed to change the odds. Chief Cross kept that patch for the rest of his deployment. When people asked him about it, he'd tell them it belonged to someone who taught him that assumptions could be dangerous in a business where being wrong got people killed. Because Major Elena Torres had proved something that every warrior should remember. Sometimes the best weapon in your arsenal is the one your enemy doesn't see coming. And sometimes when everything looks hopeless, all you need is one person who refuses to accept that some fights can't be won.